Right now, somewhere on this planet, someone is opening a bottle of wine, cracking a cold beer, or pouring a shot to celebrate something. You've probably done it yourself, maybe last weekend, maybe last night. It feels like a modern ritual: happy hour, wedding toasts, that glass of wine at the end of a long day. But here's the thing: this habit is not modern at all. It's older than the wheel. Older than writing, older than farming, older, honestly, than humans themselves. The question is, when did we actually start drinking alcohol, and why did a species that needed to hunt, gather, and survive decide that getting a little tipsy was worth the trouble? To answer that, we have to go back way further than you'd think, not to ancient Egypt, not even to the first humans. We have to go back roughly 10 million years, to a small furry primate swinging through the trees, long before anything resembling a human existed. Here's what was happening. Fruit falls from trees, it sits on the forest floor, wild yeast floating in the air lands on that fruit and starts eating the sugar inside it. That process produces alcohol as a byproduct. It's called natural fermentation, and it happens constantly in the wild, with zero help from anyone. So any animal that ate fallen fruit was essentially eating low-grade alcohol on a regular basis. Biologist Robert Dudley proposed something called the drunken monkey hypothesis. His idea was simple, but kind of wild. He argued that our primate ancestors evolved a strong attraction to the smell of alcohol because it signaled ripe, calorie-dense fruit nearby. Alcohol wasn't the goal, it was a signpost. Follow the smell, find the food, survive another day. But here's the twist that makes this actually important. Around that same window of time, roughly 10 million years ago, researchers found something remarkable in our genetic code. A single mutation appeared in a gene called ADH4. That gene controls an enzyme in our digestive system that breaks down alcohol. Before this mutation, our ancestors could barely process alcohol at all. After it, they could metabolize it 40 times more efficiently. Think about that, 40 times. That's not a small tweak. That's evolution handing our ancestors a superpower for a very specific reason, so they could safely eat fermented, fallen fruit on the forest floor without getting poisoned by it. In other words, long before there were humans, before there was language, before there was fire, our lineage was already biologically built to handle alcohol. We didn't invent drinking, we inherited the equipment for it. So the desire for alcohol and the ability to process it predates us, but actual deliberate, let's make this on purpose drinking, that's a different story, and it starts much later with actual humans. Fast forward from 10 million years ago to about 13,000 years ago, in a cave called Rekhefet in modern-day Israel. This is where things get concrete. Archaeologists working this site found stone mortars, basically ancient bowls carved into the rock with residue still stuck inside them. When researchers analyzed that residue, they found starch granules that had been altered in a very specific way, the exact chemical signature left behind when grain is malted, mashed, and fermented into beer. This wasn't an accident. Someone took wild wheat or barley, soaked it, let it sprout just enough to activate its sugars, mashed it into the mortar, added water, and let wild yeast do the rest. That's a multi-step brewing process. That's intentional. And who did this? The Natufians. Here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. The Natufians were not farmers. They were hunter-gatherers. This beer was brewed roughly 3,000 years before agriculture as we know it even existed. So let that sink in for a second. Humans may have figured out how to brew alcohol before they figured out how to reliably farm the grain to eat as food. Beer, potentially, before bread. That detail alone has caused a huge academic argument, and it leads us straight into the pivot that makes this whole topic bigger than just when did people start drinking. Here's what makes this so important. There's a theory in archaeology called the beer before bread hypothesis. The idea goes like this. Maybe humans didn't start growing wild grains purely to eat as porridge or flatbread. Maybe part of the motivation, at some sites, was to have a steady, controllable supply of grain specifically to brew alcohol for rituals, feasts, and social bonding. If that's true, even partially, it means alcohol wasn't just a fun side effect of civilization. It might have been one of the reasons humans started farming in the first place, one of the reasons we stopped wandering and started settling down. That reframes everything. This isn't a story about a party drink. This is potentially a story about the birth of agriculture, and agriculture is the single biggest turning point in human history. Cities, governments, writing, armies, religion, all of it downstream of humans deciding to stay in one place and grow food. And alcohol may have had a seat at that table from day one. Let's keep the timeline moving because it only escalates from here. Around 9,000 years ago, at a site called Jihao in Hainan Province, China, archaeologist Patrick McGovern, often nicknamed the Indiana Jones of ancient booze, analyzed pottery jars and found chemical traces of a fermented beverage made from rice, honey, and hawthorn fruit or grapes. This wasn't beer, and it wasn't wine. It was something closer to a mixed fermented drink, and it's one of the earliest chemically confirmed alcoholic beverages on the planet. Same instinct, different continent, different ingredients. Humans completely independently kept arriving at the same conclusion: let sugar and yeast do their thing and drink the result. But here's the but moment. Brewing something once in a cave is one thing. Building an entire industry around it is another. That leap happens next in Mesopotamia and Egypt, somewhere between 5,000 and 4,000 years ago. In Sumer, beer wasn't a luxury, it was practically a food group. Workers building temples and monuments were paid in beer rations. Literally, part of their daily wage was beer, because it was calorie-rich, safer to drink than untreated water, which was often contaminated, and it kept people functional and fed. There's even a surviving text called the Hymn to Ninkasi, dedicated to the Sumerian goddess of beer, which reads almost like a poetic brewing recipe. Ancient people were literally worshipping the process of fermentation. Meanwhile, in Egypt, beer and bread were considered basic staples of daily survival, so essential that tomb paintings show workers brewing beer for the afterlife, so the dead wouldn't go without it in the next world. Think about that. They were so committed to this drink that they packed it for eternity. And this is where alcohol starts doing something bigger than nutrition. It starts organizing society. Beer rations tracked on clay tablets are some of the earliest known uses of written record-keeping and accounting systems. So there's a real argument that alcohol didn't just accompany civilization, it helped administrate it. Now let's talk about wine, because it has its own separate origin story, and it's just as wild. Around 4100 BCE, in a cave called Irene I in modern-day Armenia, archaeologists found what is currently considered the oldest known winery in the world. Not just wine residue, an actual production facility, a shallow basin for pressing grapes with your feet, channels to drain the juice, storage jars, and fermentation vats, all in the same cave. This was a fully intentional, purpose-built winemaking operation over 6,000 years ago. In the same region, many scholars believe grapes were first domesticated, near the Caucasus Mountains. So by this point in the timeline, humans on multiple continents had independently built entire systems, tools, religions, and economies around fermenting sugar into alcohol. Beer in the Fertile Crescent, wine in the Caucasus, rice wine in China. Different regions, different ingredients, same underlying obsession. Which brings us back to the social side of this, because drinking was never just about the buzz. Here's the thing that ties the whole story together. Alcohol lowers social inhibition. It softens the sharp edges people put up around strangers. Some anthropologists argue that shared drinking rituals functioned as an ancient trust exercise. If you can sit across from someone, share a fermented drink, lower your guard a little, and nothing bad happens, that's a signal you can be trusted. Communal drinking may have literally helped strangers become allies, tribes become trade partners, and rivals become neighbors. So here's the full picture. It starts roughly 10 million years ago with a genetic mutation that let our primate ancestors safely eat fermented fruit off the forest floor. It moves to 13,000 years ago in a cave in Israel where hunter-gatherers, who hadn't even invented farming yet, were already brewing beer in stone mortars. It possibly tangles itself into the very origin of agriculture itself through the beer before bread theory. It shows up independently in China with rice and honey wine 9,000 years ago. It becomes a wage, a religion, and a bureaucracy in Sumer and Egypt, and it becomes a full-blown industry in a cave in Armenia over 6,000 years ago with the world's oldest known winery. Every single one of those moments, separated by thousands of years and thousands of miles, points back to the exact same impulse. Let sugar and yeast transform into something new and drink it together. So the next time you're holding a drink, at a wedding, a bar, a backyard barbecue, you're not doing something modern. You're doing something your ancestors were biologically built to do before they were even human. You're doing something people were doing in caves before they knew how to farm. You're taking part in a ritual that may have literally helped build the first cities, the first written records, and the first social bonds between strangers. We like to think of alcohol as a modern indulgence, something invented for parties and Friday nights, but really it might be one of the oldest threads connecting every human civilization that has ever existed. Maybe that's the real reason it never went away. It's not just a drink. It's one of the oldest stories we've ever told each other, just passed around in a cup instead of words. If you want more stories like this about the strange ancient roots hiding underneath everyday habits, stick around. There's a lot more buried in our past than you'd think.